In this video, I'm gonna share 7 different tips for editing on Lightroom. Hopefully at least one of these will be new to you. You can check some spoilers by checking the timestamps in the lower corner of this video. Anyway, let's get to the tips. So I want to start this video by talking about localized spot edits using these tools on Lightroom and give you a couple of tips that I like to do with these tools. First, when it comes to rainy days, I like to emphasize the pavement by adding a linear gradient onto the lower part of the photo, because when you got this wet pavement, you want to emphasize that because it looks really cool in the photo, but you don't want to affect the overall look of the photo too much. I kind of like the softer glow of the lights. So just gonna add a graduated filter here and increase the clarity. Another thing that I like to do is remove distractions with the healing brush. Most of the time you don't have to go over to Photoshop to do this, and most of the time you just gotta make a couple of adjustments. And little things like these, removing distractions, can make your photos more minimal, more simple, and just make them feel a little bit more painting-like. Now, of course, if we're going for ultra realism, that is not necessarily something you even want to do, but I think it's a pretty decent tip to make your photos just a little bit simpler, because simplicity is a factor that I really enjoy in photography. And now we gotta jump over to Lightroom Classic, because this feature does not exist on the other version of Lightroom for whatever reason, but it's the auto masking feature, and this is very useful when you're using the brushing tool to select an area on your photo. And this is a feature that I only found out about recently. I used to select all of these manually, but this auto masking feature makes it so much easier. You can see that it's not perfect, but it's definitely so much easier than manually brushing areas or silhouettes. It is kind of an annoying theme in Lightroom that a lot of the features are not available on the mobile version, and some of the features that are available on the mobile versions are not available on the classic version, but I'm sure Adobe is gonna fix that at some point. They're pretty good at adding features. I mean, here's hoping. Not a sponsored video, by the way. This is something that I discovered when I got my Leica M10. When I was previewing my photos on the back of the camera, the colors looked great. But when I imported these photos into Lightroom, when I imported the RAWs into Lightroom, all of a sudden the colors just kind of became more muted and kind of boring. And that is because when you import RAWs into Lightroom, Lightroom automatically applies a Adobe color profile, but different cameras come with their own profiles. So you can go into profile, and this only works on Lightroom Classic. So you gotta use the desktop to do this at the moment. You go into profile and you click browse, and for Leica M10, for example, you can find the Leica M10 profile, and all of a sudden the colors look like they're supposed to look. Different cameras have different kind of profiles, so this depends on what you're using, but it's definitely helpful to know this. I'm not saying you have to use this. On my Sony, I just use the default profile, but on my Leica, it is very helpful. The next tip is about using dehaze and clarity in kind of the opposite way from what they were intended. This is especially useful if you like editing moody photos. In this example, we have a photo of a foggy road, and in order to exaggerate the fog and create kind of a dreamier feeling, I have decreased the clarity and dehaze. If you remove them, you can see the effects recreated here. In some photos, it's also a good idea to use negative clarity combined with spot edits. You could do it by only adding the negative clarity in certain light sources to create more exaggerated glow or light beams in your photos. Same goes for dehaze. If you watch my other videos where I do more detailed editing kind of tutorials or rundowns, you can see me using these tricks more often. So check out my other videos as well. Know all the different ways you can color grade your image and find the one that works best for you. There's several different ways you can color grade your image, and depending on which kind of result you're going for, you might want to use a different tool to reach that result. The options are white balance, HSL, camera calibration, and tone curve. And then you also have split toning, which is now called color grading, for maximum confusion. I've seen different photographers use different methods to all create different kinds of stunning color grades, so there's no objectively best way, but it's good to understand the difference between all these, and especially in those times when you're stuck on an edit, it's good to experiment with kind of a different path that you'd normally use, and maybe you can find something you didn't think of or learn something. For example, and I'll try to do a summary because there's like 20-minute long explanation videos on just this one topic alone. Camera calibration and HSL are pretty similar tools, but there's some differences. You can change the hue and saturation of different colors with both of them. And personally, I prefer HSL because camera calibration isn't available on Lightroom Mobile, and I like to use Lightroom Mobile because I like to lay on the couch while I edit photos because I'm a lazy pig. However, the main difference between camera calibration and HSL is that camera calibration changes the colors of the whole image, while HSL only targets the pixels that register as a specific color already. HSL affects individual colors, and so it's a more fine-tuned way to edit, while camera calibration is a more generic way to edit the whole look of the image. Now, if you really know how to use both of these tools, you can probably achieve pretty similar results with both of them, but there are some differences. Also, with tone curve, you can edit RGB color channels and add or subtract these color channels from either highlights or shadows or in the midtones, and you have more control because it's a tone curve. You can select where exactly you add or subtract these colors. And for creative kind of edits especially, this can be a very powerful tool. However, for me, I prefer the simplicity of using the split toning feature to achieve, for the most part, the same result. But again, sometimes when I'm stuck on an edit, I'll experiment with the different than usual methods. Anyway, the point is, understanding how all these different color grading tools work can bring your color grading to the next level and give you some ideas that you didn't previously think of. For example, I didn't even find out about camera calibration until like just a couple months ago, simply because I always edit on the phone and it wasn't available on that version yet. The newly released versions feature on the mobile versions of Lightroom really is an excellent way to help you find a direction, especially in those edits that you really don't know which way you want to go to. So what I like to do is create a couple of different edits, a couple of different tones, then wait a little bit and go back and then see which one of these looks the best, and then continue editing on that. You can create as many versions as you want, and I really like this new feature. So you want to understand exactly what Lightroom can and cannot do, and then you want to shoot with that in mind. For example, in high contrast night photography, it often makes sense to protect the highlights and underexpose the shadows, and then fix the exposure later in Lightroom. This way you have more to work with. But you gotta know the limits of this. Lightroom can't fix everything if you underexpose too much, although it can fix a surprising amount. And this also, of course, depends on your camera. In fact, with worse cameras, for example, that have terrible ISO performance, it often makes sense to cap your ISO relatively soon, because Lightroom can actually sometimes outperform the internal ISO performance of older cameras, especially at numbers as high as 6.4 thousand, for example, but sometimes even sooner. It also helps to know things like perspective correction, for example. Should you worry about it in the field, or should you buy an expensive tilt shift lens when you could just use the perspective correction feature? But in order to use this feature, you gotta remember to shoot a little bit of extra in terms of the composition to have enough room to work with. And in the same vein, you don't have to really buy the expensive ultra-wide lens for photography when you could just be taking panoramas that will end up being higher resolution anyway. In short, what I mean, digital photography doesn't end with taking the photo. Obviously, you're watching a Lightroom related video, so you probably agree with this. Digital photography is a combination of editing and photography. So know the limits of both your camera, the raw files that it takes, and what Lightroom can ultimately create with them. And this way you can shoot for the edit and really optimize your results. That's it for the tips. Hopefully at least one of these were useful to you. If you like the recent trend of Lightroom related, editing related videos, let me know by giving this video a thumbs up. And you want to see more of them, haven't subscribed yet, you know what to do. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.